getting into people's crawl spaces with them, into their deepest, darkest, scariest, and I don't say that lightly. I mean, everybody knows the contents of their own mind. Be with them while they feel really, trigger warning, that they feel that they don't deserve to live, where they feel that they might end up hurting someone. Their thoughts are telling them that that's going to happen. To get into these sticky, unacceptable places and to just sit there and be a light and just accompany them to these places. I had to be a therapist. I just had to. I say this all the time to people when I'm trying to make that plea to get them into therapy. Like, OCD is so treatable. Yeah. It's so treatable. And when I discovered how treatable it was like, whoa.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Get to Know OCD podcast. My name is Patrick McGrath. I'm the Chief Clinical Officer for NOCD. If you're looking for help for obsessive compulsive disorder or related conditions, check us out at nocd.com. And you can subscribe to the NOCD YouTube channel to get more episodes of the Get to Know OCD podcast. I'm very excited today to have a NOCD therapist with us, Saraa Lee. Saraa, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
I love some of the things that you have put out about your own personal story, about the influence of culture, the aspects of stigma. And I think it's so important to discuss, right? Even in some of the work we've done recently at NOCD, we've started our multicultural case consultation group. You know, that has been something very important to me, to make sure that we show all the faces of OCD, from providers to people who have OCD. And it is not just someone who looks like this, right? So thank you, first and foremost, for that. And like I said, I'm very excited to talk about the experiences, because you've really touched on what I think are very important things, from what the healthcare system looks at when they see a person walk in the door, how pain and suffering are interpreted by race and culture, and also just stereotypes in terms of who do we think is going to follow through in treatment and not. And so it is one of the most important discussions I think that we can have.
I 100% agree. These are the things that, come up for us, those of us who are clinicians of color who started out in undergrad wanting to study therapy. The initial conversations totally leave us out, and we're having these side conversations like, are you kidding me? Just because the person showed up in this way, you're going to say that means that they're bipolar? The person just didn't have money to get their hair done, There are all these little nuances that are constantly coming up, and to be at this stage in my career and to be working with you guys and to finally say, I'm going to say this stuff. I'm tired of feeling held back and feeling that my voice and my experience is not sufficient and not validated. And just kind of going out on a limb and hearing you guys respond positively and go, yeah, it's like,
here you are now.
I know. And
let's talk some more.
Thank you for talking back to us. Yes, this is great. And it's such a metaphor too for ERP. Like I love metaphors. When you start talking back to the external real system, or the real, but intrusive thoughts in your mind, the process of talking back, you get to discover what's on the other side. And in best case scenario, you discover that you're welcome, and that there's, you can change the world. That's awesome.
Well, you are welcome here, very, very much. And could you share just a little bit of your own journey into all of this, of what you've gone through, what led to becoming a therapist, and even coming from your background, and how did the family even think about you becoming a therapist, and all of those things? I think it's such an amazing story, and I've loved listening to you be open about those, and what a platform we have here today to really talk about it. So.
I love being open about these things. One of the things that's really, it's vulnerable, but I really think it's important to share it because it informs who I am as a therapist. I have an ACE score of 10, and an ACE score is, I forgot what's an ACE. It's Adverse Childhood Events. There we go. An ACE score of 10. And that is my primary motivator for wanting to become a therapist, you know, living in this world in which safety is not guaranteed. It's not guaranteed to anyone.
Nope.
In a world that's racist, I grew up in South Central. So in a world where you're I didn't have this language as a child. I wasn't like we're systematically denied resources, you know, but clearly, you know, you drive to the other side of LA and it's like, why are there more parks? And this is nicer here. So living in that world and just being a child and trying to make sense of that, it was really hard, which is an understatement. But we're going to touch on this a little bit later, but my family had strengths. My culture had strengths. Our community had and still has strengths. There are messages that we received in order to affirm who we are and how we get through things. But those messages didn't quite cover intrusive thoughts. I sort of thought that I was doomed. I just thought that, you know, there's really no way to talk about this. When we did get to a place of receiving some sort of systemic help or medical help, there wasn't ever a discussion of therapy. I sort of just suffered with these things alone and had to come up with different strategies of how to sort of survive internally, you know. When I got to high school, I was a dork. I was in academic decathlon. And all 4 years of high school, and one of the years we studied philosophy, religion, and and I forget, politics, you know. And that religious text, we read about Abraham Maslow, the hierarchy of needs. We read about just the way in which the internal world matters. It matters. And that was the beginning. I just knew right away. I said, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I want to be. That you can support the individual to shift and support communities to change and, like, I don't know, maybe fix families. You know, you can do lots of lovely things. So that was exactly what I wanted to do. And for the people who were these amazing mentors of mine, by the time I got, you know, into college, when I sort of came out with that desire, most of those mentors were like, no. There still wasn't this feeling that psychology was a hard enough science or that you would have enough of a career. And I was all over the place. I interned at Merrill Lynch. I was in finance for a while. Like, I went around the world. I was going to be like a foreign service officer. I was going to do that. I really tried to keep it open. But ultimately I had to be a therapist. I just had to.
And what, in terms of your own experience, would you say really led to that? Like, why did you have to be a therapist? What were you not getting in those other experiences that you do get from being a therapist?
The humanity.
There we go.
The humanity. Yeah. People are not numbers. They just can't be. And while they were really nice numbers, and I would have made a lot of good money, and the lunches were paid, there's vacation. It would have been so nice. I needed to connect. And I think that's also why it's so meaningful to be able to be vulnerable in these spaces, to have these conversations, to open up in these ways. I think humans fundamentally need to connect, not just, you know, at their best, if I'm all made up and I look good and I'm modeling in that moment. It's at our worst. It's at our scariest places. And once I understood that you could connect with people there and that was allowed and valid and that was also good enough, it's like I want more of that. And I want more of knowing that, I want more of that being the actual world, you know? Not that our internal world is just something we have to manage to get out and make money during the day, that it can be front and center and it can be a whole career and it can be a thing that we focus on.
And how long have you been a therapist now?
I was born to be.
You were born to be a therapist. Yeah. Right.
Gosh, I graduated in 2012 from UCLA with an MSW, but you know, they started us before then.
Yeah,
you know?
Right.
So I don't know, somewhere between, and I got licensed in 2018, 2024, somewhere between 6 and 14 years, depending on when you're allowed to count.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and you're right. There's a lot of practicums. We were both through all those. Yeah.
Yeah.
What have you learned being a therapist in terms of the people you're interacting with that they're not getting in their lives or in the world that they need, and that we can provide to them, or that what kind of space can we offer someone to actualize themselves?
The way that I like to describe it is getting into people's crawl spaces with them, into their deepest, darkest, scariest, and I don't say that lightly. I mean, everybody knows the contents of their own mind.
Yeah.
It gets pretty intense in there, and to be able to be with them while they feel really, I mean, trigger warning, that they feel that they don't deserve to live, where they feel that they might end up hurting someone. Their thoughts are telling them that that's going to happen, where they know they've suffered something and they feel like it might be their fault if they've suffered an abuse or something like that. To get into these sticky, unacceptable places and to just sit there and be a light and just accompany them to these places. People are lonely, even it's like a trope, like even the most popular people are lonely on the inside, because what really matters is that inner core, that hidden self. If you're lonely there, then all the external stuff, it sort of doesn't count at the end of the day,
And if you're working with somebody who's scared to open up about that loneliness, what do you do to help get them there and to be vulnerable?
I think primarily I like to slow down.
Okay.
I like to be still. If not, I mean, obviously I'm sitting in the chair being still, but to really slow down, making sure I'm listening to every piece of their story. And because I know that they're a human, I can sort of assume that there's an inner self in there. So I actively interview for it. And sometimes I use self-disclosure, which is why I'm comfortable saying that my ACE score is a 10, I got a lot going on too. And normalizing that most people have a lot going on in different ways. And I find that to be one of the things that allows people to really soften up and open up to me in those ways. And my willingness to be with it.
For those who are resistant to that, right? And we've met some. How much do you use some of that self-disclosure of yourself as a model for that experience?
Well, sometimes I try to just be honest in the moment, resistance can give us therapists big feelings too. We're like, please, just come on, please. We're feeling really strongly. And so the person is kind of in this in this, I guess, fearful place where they don't trust me yet, or they don't trust the process yet, or they don't trust the system, all of which I agree with. I'm like, I'm the man, like, don't trust me.
Yeah, right.
However, what I often find is that me admitting, I guess in the moment, that I would really like to hear more, or that I'm feeling like there might be more present, or if I was in your situation feeling like this, I probably wouldn't tell me either. Like, and just being honest, like I would feel that way too. But we know that if we go down that road, we don't get help. And I've been down that road not getting help. And so maybe here's a story, an example of where I did give it a try and things were able to change. So this might be an opportunity to give that a chance. So self-disclosure still comes into it. And every person is a puzzle. So you kind of just figure out sort of what works, like a sprinkle in a little personal story. I quote bell hooks a lot for people for whom that's appropriate, thinking about feminist Black scholars, other resistance scholars, people who rightly resisted. You're in a place of resistance. They're talking about the power of resistance. If we validate all of that, sometimes people naturally will just sort of relax into it and give themselves a chance to open up.
And I remember studying this in graduate school, but obviously that person in that other chair brings a whole bunch of stuff with them. Orientations, identities, creeds, cultures, race. There's so many things. their cat died that day, whatever it might be, right? Is in that. And how do you honor all of that as part of the therapeutic experience?
I think to boil it down to sort of where I come from in terms of my theoretical orientation, in terms of my stance in the room, my assumption is that everybody would benefit from, how to say this, of all the research I've read and of all the things I've read that are outside of the psychological arena of psychological field of study, for me, taking the time to read LGBTQ scholars, Latin American studies, Black studies, all of these things, there is a really complex and pre-existing set of knowledge in how to connect with people and how to understand people's perspectives. Unfortunately, that's not in our textbooks. It's not. What they do is they sort of assume I'm a white man as a therapist, and they assume the client is probably not going to benefit that much. I'm just going to be real. Some of the textbooks are that way. And it's like how to just basically keep them where they are, how to keep them from like getting worse. And so even having an imagination that people who are non-binary, who are Black, who are recent immigrants from South Asia, that these people can and should thrive, that is like bringing that in the room, first of all, is a big step. Yes. Assuming that they have strengths that they come into the room with. Assuming that I don't know everything, and I think really asking the person to guide you through the experience that they want to be having in life. I think that that's really key.
I remember wanting to be an archaeologist when I was a kid, but I have really bad allergies, and I thought I'll sneeze with the dust of a precious artifact and I'll just drop it and break it on the floor. So psychology in a way became archaeology of the mind, where we could just dig through and really learn so very much about this person that's there, and the beauty of that, and holding the space for that to allow for something like that to happen. And how do you create that space then that allows people to be vulnerable and want to tell you some of these, especially coming from some backgrounds where therapy might be the fifth option. Yeah. Right?
After Jesus. Yeah. The miracle didn't come yet. It's funny. That's so cool to hear you describe it that way. I call therapy, it's brain surgery without a scalpel.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. There we go.
What I mentioned earlier about going into people's scariest spaces, about slowing down with them, about being vulnerable myself, about my deep humanity, being willing to sit with all sorts of things that might be more intense, or, even sitting with silence. I'm very comfortable with that.
Yeah.
I think that bringing, to be honest, I forgot your question. I just really.
No, that's okay. just that idea of creating that space with somebody. Okay.
So bringing in the silence, the willingness to sit with people, assuming that they have strengths, assuming that they have a deep core of humanity, sharing my fears, all of these things. So you create that space because we do it all the time. That's why I'm having trouble. I'm like, how do I describe it?
Yeah, I mean, it is weird. It's like, tell me how to drive. Well, I just do it. It's so automatic, right?
Oh, here it is. Okay, it came back to me. Presence is a lot more powerful. I know I said we use silence and sitting with it and presence and all of these things, but people have gone through the world. Like I described, growing up as a little Black girl in South Central, who was giving me time of day, Yes, members of my community. Yes, members of my family. But we had issues, like, because of the racism, because of the systemic, oppression, having somebody who has an official title, so me, the therapist, coming in and taking you incredibly seriously. People don't typically get that. Out in the world in general, we don't validate each other. We aren't as loving as we should be. And now I'm here creating the space for your deepest, darkest, scariest parts to be the most precious thing to me. I find that to be the thing that tends to get people, I guess, to get their lid unflipped, to get them to a place where they can sort of begin to soothe and then be open to accepting the help. And then much of the time with people who have a lot of trauma, you kind of sort of can't go in through the frontal lobe, like their lid is too flipped. And so I often do this for myself, and I support my clients to do this as well. Like we might have to get in the body, you know. I've certainly asked clients who are African American women, like, girl, let's twerk. Like we need to move right now. Like literally, we have to get in our bodies. This is a part of the resistance strategies that people already come in with. You know, I tend to know very well mine, if you're an African American person, a woman in particular, you know. But for people who are gender expansive, for people who are recent immigrants, like just it's about learning as much as I can, and then again interviewing and asking specifically, what does your grandmother do? Yeah. What does your mom do? What do you do? What helps you feel good? We often have that question. What are your coping strategies? And nobody knows what that is. People are like, I don't have any. And then you go through and read the rest, and you see, you know, if you ask, what do they like to do? It's like, oh, I like to read. I like to stare at the wall and look at the different colors on my grandmother's, like, you know, thing that she painted. Like, they have a lot of them. So when you interview for them, then you can find all these nuances of how they resist, and you can bring those into the room.
Yeah, there's such a power in asking a question versus making an assumption, right? Yeah. And I think there's also a power in recognizing that cultures express all of this very differently. And so I cannot assume that I understand when I'm going into meeting with someone, even if they're Irish, that I know theirs, because they might be Northern Ireland and my family's from South, Ireland or something like that, right? So I even cannot make those kinds of assumptions as well. That is a standard thing, I think, across the board in the work that we're doing with therapy. And some of the things that you've put out, and we can put links to some of your stories and the stuff that you've published already, I think really broach that so nicely, where you're telling these various stories for people to question their own assumptions, right? If there's something I don't ever want to do, it's being stuck in the idea that I already know it.
Yeah.
Right. I don't ever want to do that.
I have certainly made that mistake with other Black women clients. You know, they're coming in and I'm like, oh my God, sis, it's so good to see you. Like, and they're like, so I'm like, oh, you know, it is an art to connect with anybody, including if you share multiple identities. And sometimes that can be a little more, that can create a different kind of resistance, because people don't want to suffer yet another set of stereotypes. Just because I'm Black doesn't mean this. And that's incredibly valid, you know? Yeah. So we are dancers. We are professional Cirque du Soleil dancers. Yeah. That's how nuanced and complicated this is, you know? So pretty much anything you hear me say, like I'm applying a piece of it at a time, combined with other things, sprinkle with some salt and pepper. Like it's always so strategic the way that we do it.
I'll be a little vulnerable here. I was meeting with one of our therapists recently, and I love accents. I love learning about where people are from. And so I made mention of great accent. Where are you from? And she looked a little down. And so I asked about that, and she said, it's something that everybody asks. And I was like, huh, I never thought of it that way. For me, it was just I'm so excited to learn about you, and a curiosity. But to her, it was, I'm different in some way.
Yeah.
And it was like one of those just light bulb kind of moments for me that, again, here I am making an assumption that I'm getting to know you, and I would never in a million years assume that would be something disappointing. Yeah. And look at that interpretation of it.
Yeah.
It was fascinating.
Once I had someone I was sort of a mentor figure to here in our profession, and the person said to me, oh my gosh, like your culture is so creative. You guys have such beautiful music, and there's like a lot of athletics. That's really wonderful. And I said this, and we talked about it in the moment. I loved this person. They were very receptive and totally got it. And I said, yeah, we had to do that stuff because they wouldn't let us go to universities. Doesn't mean it's obviously, Simone Biles, it's obviously a gift But for that to be the thing we're always known for, it's like
Yeah.
they wouldn't let my grandpa get a PhD. And so, like, what were we supposed to do? Like,
Right. Yeah. And I think it's statements like that where you can create those mind-blowing kind of light bulb moments and people just go, oh, yeah. And on the flip side, not only couldn't you do that, but what some people have been subjected to, right? You know, Tuskegee and various things where we look at people almost, well, not almost, we look at people as subhuman. I'm just going to say it, not even an almost there, that, you know, we're pawns, and it just sad.
it's extremely sad.
Yeah.
And it turns people off to what we can possibly do, you know? I say this all the time to people when I'm trying to like make that plea to get them into therapy. Like, OCD is so treatable.
Yeah.
It's so treatable. And when I discovered how treatable it was like, whoa, like I just had, once I learned this tool, I had, I say a good time, but it's not a good time. It's painful, you know, but I just felt so empowered to sit with all of these fears I had lived with for like decades that I thought were just a part of who I was. On the way over here, I sat with like 75 of them. And it was like, the heaviness I felt, like, it's like, it's hot outside, but inside it was hotter, you know, in my soul. And how hard it is sometimes to just get out of the door, you know, and especially to go do something you care about, you know, how the thoughts just sort of come.
Yeah, well, that's going to suck. You're going to screw this up. All those things. Yeah.
I'm an expert at it.
Yeah.
My brain knows exactly what to do. But, you know, being able to understand that heaviness that I felt is not my friend, and it's not who I am, and I don't have to live like that. I'm not supposed to.
Yeah.
I don't have to. And I certainly don't have to live with it. And even if I can't make it go away, it's not going to tell me what to do.
Right.
I was so sad getting dressed, but I was like, I got to do it. I'm still going to do it. And here I am, you know, doing this interview. And I think it's very similar to racism. It's very similar to heteronormativity, to LGBTQ hatred. It's in the world, it's in the water, it's in the air. You don't know who's gonna like get activated and just like flip out on you. You have no idea. And so the intrusive thoughts are like, and this is personal to me, I did not know this was OCD at the time, but whenever I would go out to like stores and things like that, if it was in a majority white area, I would get really, I would have a lot of intrusive thoughts about my appearance, that every hair has to be exactly in the right place. My outfit has to look exactly like this. I need to have a certain silhouette. Sometimes each step would be difficult because my brain would be like, they're going to think you're going to steal. They're going to think this about you. They're going to think that about you. Going into the store, hi, I have to have just the right smile, because if I do it all correctly, then they won't be racist towards me. OCD has no control over that. And it's this place where I do need to seek safety. I do need to be careful where I am and who's going to maybe flip out, who's looking at me weird. But OCD took that and made it times 1,000, and it was incredibly debilitating, you know? So we are working with people who are already scared of us, and rightfully so, based on the history of what they've gone through and what their grandparents have gone through. And there's all these stories and all this art created around the harm that's been done to us. So they're rightfully resisting. And then here we are saying, hi, we're just these nice people who are going to help you. And they've got to get through not just the layer of, so in my case, not just the layer of racism and fear that you're going to be harmed because of your race, also the layer of their own mind and sitting with all of these scary thoughts, because OCD says, I'll get you if you don't do it. So we are in like, it's like a double jeopardy. Like, so we as therapists coming into the room, like, you know, even, I just think that truly there's so much more work that we can always be doing ourselves, you know, just in terms of, like I mentioned earlier, reading all the different scholarship, reading how other people are resisting. Like, there's this book, Decolonizing Therapy, that by Dr. Jennifer Mullen. And it's pretty thorough, you know, it's pretty thorough. The initial chapters are like, these are all the ways in which indigenous people and African people have, and colonized people have been harmed all over the world. And it's like, so heavy. But that is the heaviness that we live with. and being able to name it when we're in the room and name it when we're working with people and bring that into our I guess our intake questions and our research questions and the way that we even frame talking about ERP treatment. I think that's like the Octavia Butler-esque future that I want, like, you know, where all of this stuff gets combined into mental health treatment, that we don't have to like sneak around into mental health treatment to get people the stuff that they need. So,
and then once they're getting the treatment, I think too, it's really having an understanding of what kind of even assignments we give people in ERP.
Absolutely.
Because I could give a white child an assignment that I should not give maybe a black child.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely, because you can create harm.
Yeah.
Oh, man. I have a daughter. She's 7, and she goes to school. It's a majority white school. And just listening to the way that some people handle racist incidents at the school, the health of my daughter is not front and center there. It's status quo that's front and center. Mm-hmm. And so it causes harm to the child, to my child, you know? And so in therapy, we might be thinking about, and I trust that almost every single therapist means well, you know, like trying to do things in a way that's like sort of according to, you know, our ethical principles and how things are supposed to sound. But you're absolutely right. This is an OCD thought about racism, for example, in my case. So then, therefore, I should have her go in there dressed any kind of way and pretend that, you know, that she's going to steal something. Absolutely not. No,
we are not doing that. No.
Absolutely not. We need to take the realities of this person's life into account, you know, and we might want to do that in imaginal exposure. But if we, and this is where we might lose people, if I say to a person, hey, you know, that person might not be homophobic. Like, think about that. It might be in your mind. That person is not, I mean, they rightly should not come back, that client, you know? And so it really is a delicate dance of, first of all, admitting that the world is racist and admitting that the world is homophobic and admitting that these things are baked into our systems. I mean, the amount of times we're trying to get people to listen, like, please understand. And, you know, that alone is exhausting. And so for us as the therapist, for us as NOCD, to start from this ground zero of we believe it's real, that's incredibly crucial.
Yeah.
And if that is the reality, then I, as a trainer at NOCD, can make sure we're teaching our therapists to bring structural racism into the room with the client such that they can design these exposures really carefully, you know? That's how we keep people. That's how we bring them in by letting them know we're doing that. That's how we get them to open up at the beginning by being said, hey, I recognize systemic racism, like as it comes up in the conversation. And then, you know, mentioning it in the course of doing the exposures as well. That's how you get people's trust. People just want to be believed.
Yeah. And taken seriously. Right. And
not abandoned to that reality either. Because that also sucks where it's like, oh, racism is so sad. I'm so sorry about that. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's now talk about these thoughts. You know, it's like, no, it's all a part of it. Mm-hmm. You know, during the course of working at NOCD, I never, obviously training did not touch on like racism OCD, but I found out about it through working with clients.
Yeah.
And then I was able to name that that's a part of what was going on for me.
Yeah.
Like it's just so interesting.
Right. And now even when I interview people to come to NOCD, I have that in the interview. I said, OCD takes on any topic it can, and racism is one of the things that I say right in there when I'm interviewing people.
Yes.
So it's in there now.
Yes.
Yeah. Because we do recognize subtypes better and better all of the time, right? And so I've made that a purposeful addition into the interview for anybody.
That is so cool. And also I want to say, like, you know, to people who are listening and who are sort of maybe scared about potentially trusting a therapist to get treatment, your presence changes things.
Yeah.
You know, my presence has changed things. Our presence changes things, you know, and that's not really what we're taught about this terrible, horrible system. It's like, it's always going to get you no matter what. Yeah. And, you know, maybe not. However, if we don't show up and try, we don't get a chance to construct a different future. So
Yeah, to me, no organization is worth it if they're not going to be able to take a step back and be called out on something and just say things. And, I think back because I've been at NOCD almost 5 years now. You've been here for almost that long.
Yeah.
And some of those even conversations at the beginning that we had about this were very influential in bringing this experience to the masses, right? And making sure that it was one that people would come back to. Because you can get people to come in. Can you keep them? Right? Is key.
Yeah.
And that's so important, is to create that space where someone is going to say at the end of it, all right, I'm going to go back.
Considering how hard it is to have these intrusive, I'm laughing because it's like, always come back, yes, but man, the fact that people come back, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Because we're like, here, let's share all of your scariest thoughts and feelings, and now we're gonna look at them, and we're gonna look at them, and we're gonna look at them. That is, every time somebody comes back, that just warms my heart. It is just so powerful because I know how hard it is. Yeah. And the nature of what we do, it's so the opposite of the therapy that people imagine, like the talk therapy, where we're just gonna sort of talk about it and talk about it some more, and maybe it's because of your mom or whatever, whatever they think we're gonna do. But no, we're gonna sit there and we're going to hold the hot potato. We're not gonna pass it. We have to be extra careful with people of color and people who are, outside of this heteronormative standard, to make sure that they come back, because of the nature of the work, because it's so scary already. So I just wanted to, it's just so hard. Mm-hmm. It's just so hard.
For people coming in to therapy, and this is one of the things that I like what you have said, where remember that therapy is for you, right? It is for you. And we can deal with everybody else as well too, but really this is for you. And I always love to tell people it's okay to be a little selfish here, to worry about you. But for people coming into therapy whose culture might say first, we don't talk to other people. We keep this in the family. And then we go to the pastor. And, then we consult the elders maybe, and then we pray and all these types of things. And then maybe we'll talk to a medical doctor first, right? And then we might look at this therapy thing, right? How do you, maybe by the time they've come to you, you're the sixth person, and they may come in with this notion of, I don't trust you because I've been told I got to do all these other things first. You are way down the line. How do you build that trust? How do you get that rapport going?
Well, first of all, you start out by acknowledging the genius that they already have. They talked to their elders. They knew to do that. They knew to pray. They knew their family communicated about this. They all of those things are extremely valuable, and all of those things can handle many problems, Yeah. So I think, first of all, you come in with full respect and deference to all of those things, and I mean, even listening those things out, I feel good. I'm like, shoot, I want to consult some elders and talk to some, that should handle most things. And to be honest, many people, by the time they come to us, many people, the things that you listed, in some ways they're not available because they've immigrated here, because of colonialism, because their traditions have been forbidden, literally illegal for generations.
Native American schools and things
exactly.
like that. Yeah.
Having our languages outlawed and drums outlawed and all of these things outlawed. So, I mean, to me, what you described is a person who's quite intact, Yeah. And I'd say, hey, don't trust me, but I got these couple of tips for you. And I wouldn't try to permeate into their structures more than they need me to. But I would say, hey, with all of this, let me be a supplement. Let me figure out where I can fit in, to what you already have. I very much view, I have snatched ERP for myself. I've been very selfish with it. And the way that I look at it for myself, So I'll go to my experience and then I'll sort of generalize it out. I'm the descendant of enslaved people. All of my great-great-grandparents were enslaved or born at a time of enslavement. And I think about every woman in particular, because I'm a woman who had experienced any 5 seconds of that trauma. And did they have an opportunity to sit down and cry? Absolutely not. It was expressly forbidden. Expressly. I went to New Orleans and to visit the Whitney plantation, and there's other art, there's other museums as well with these photographs and these depictions, and one of them showed a funeral for an enslaved person, and it was just burial. There was an overseer standing there watching, I guess to make sure they didn't mourn. And there was just quick burial, and the people just kind of had to go. Like that was sort of what was depicted in the scene. They were not allowed to grieve. And so when I think about today getting dressed and all of the heaviness that I felt and the times that I might have needed to just sit and breathe or sort of acknowledge the way that I'm feeling, sometimes cry a lot, cry, that is an act of resistance. That's a big fuck you. Mm-hmm. To this system, and I do it just to see the look on their face. Mm-hmm. I do it to be an asshole, I have stronger words.
I'm assuming, yeah. PG-13 podcast.
I get to feel my feelings. I get to, and OCD, any kind of intrusive thought or anxiety is not going to take that from me because I get to be a whole experience of a person. And this tends to be what racism and LGBTQ hatred and all the xenophobia, whatever it is, it tends to take you and tell you, you don't get to be a whole person. You need to be this little box of what I think you are in order to be safe. And even then you're not safe. And so for this person who has all of these other cultural options and they still find that they need this OCD support, I say, these are brilliant technologies that you guys have of surviving and thriving and staying together, trying to keep your culture intact. How can I fit this into your worldview? Yeah. I have fit it into mine. It's a take that to the system. Mm-hmm. And so for you, for example, with some Indigenous clients that I've had, listening to the guidance of elders and listening to ancestral wisdom is incredibly crucial. And here comes that OCD voice getting in the way, mimicking the voice of someone who actually does have knowledge for you. Yeah. And so the way that I can describe it there is that if we use this ERP technique, I'm not just here to tell you that I know how to exist because I don't. You know that. But what I can do is I can help you use this technique to hear your ancestors better. Mm-hmm. If you can sit with all the psychological portion, if you help me just root that out, what's left over is this ability to utilize all of these resources. Mm-hmm. With religious OCD, religion is supposed to be a source of joy and connection and identity. And I have a client who is unable to connect with any of those things, even though they really, really want to. And that's another example. Like, we don't share the same religion. We don't, but what their religion is, asking them, what does this mean to you? And having them describe, the connection to their family, to where they're from back home, the connection that they hope to have with the spirit realm. And then hearing the way that OCD gets in the way, I can get in and help them really notice, see how it felt to talk about the beauty of that and how expansive and open and exciting you are when you're talking about those values, and how scary and debilitating it feels when you're talking about these fears. I can help you separate those two things, you know? So really viewing myself, again, as a surgeon. I'm here to do scalpel, I guess like surgical changes. There's this satire. This movie is called Sorry to Bother You. Have you ever?
I think I might have seen that one. Yeah. Okay.
And then I just watched They Clone Tyrone.
Oh.
And so basically, there is this long tradition. So I speak to these two films that are African American satire films that are very much about like, you walk into a room all trusting, you're going to learn about a thing or you're going to take this job, and they end up trying to turn you into a white person, like essentially, like this sci-fi satire. And these are common stories that circulate, and I think for me, making sure I'm extra mindful of that people are afraid of our systems because they don't want to be cloned. They don't want to be changed into someone that they are not.
Mm-hmm.
And so coming in and being intentional about that, and even saying, I don't know the best way to live. I guess it's having that humility and letting them know my intention is not to overstep and try to construct you. I'm just trying to get that OCD out of there.
I've always thought of ERP, at least how I've tried to approach it, is what can I do to assist you in removing things from your life that interfere with you living within your culture in the best way possible. Mm-hmm. And OCD definitely does that, mm-hmm. right? Oh, that prayer wasn't right, so you're going to hell. Or, ooh, you gave them a look maybe, and that maybe you should go back and apologize, like a moral scrupulous kind of thing, or mm-hmm. or whatever it might be, even to racism things. And did I give a slight to someone or something like that? And yeah, if I can just help people be not like everyone else, but be comfortable almost being mm-hmm. like everyone else, and not having to go to that next level where OCD, I've always said this, OCD says everyone else is here and you got to be here to be equal to everybody else, right?
That's also what society says to people. Literally, wow,
you took my take right there, Saraa. Yeah.
Right there. That's literally what we grow up hearing. You got to work twice as hard to be half as good, not because it's true of humans, but because the system doesn't really want you to be okay. The way things are set up is that you do have to work extra hard to get the same amount of, recognition. And I remember my dad would say whatever he said as a elder black man from spend his summers in the South, watching his dad step off and say no sir, yes sir to just random people in the streets. Yeah. So he had very strong thoughts, and they were right, about how to get through this world. By the time I came along, things were different. I was like, Daddy, things are different now. I certainly gave it a good try, and it took experiencing it for me to say, wow, like this stuff is really, it's really embedded into people and their souls and the choices that they make and to the systems that we set up, this is all very emotional. So sometimes I get lost in it.
I think of a video I saw, and I don't know if you've seen this one, but mm-hmm. there's about 50 people lined up. Mm-hmm. They're white, black, Hispanic, Asian, everybody. Mm-hmm. And it's an exercise, and we're going to run. Mm-hmm. And this goes to athletics piece where you were going as well too. Mm-hmm. And he talks about if we started this race, everybody's in the same line. Oh. Who do you think? Do you know where I'm going?
Yeah.
But first of all, if you were raised in a family that have both parents, take 2 steps forward. Mm-hmm. And you see now, and just by the time that he goes through these things, mm-hmm. there's people almost already at the finish line.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And then you look back and you're like, oh, jeez. And to me, I mean, that video is one of the most powerful representations of what you are describing.
Yeah.
About how are we set up to succeed, and what is the extra effort that so many people have to do just to try to be equal to everybody else, mm-hmm. right?
And so if OCD is also there exacerbating it,
mm-hmm.
saying
mm-hmm.
you have to be 17 times as good to be just as good as everyone else.
Yeah.
And then that's also reflected in society. That is then our job, our complex job as therapists, to come in and validate that, to try to say that OCD is wrong, but also say that their experience is right, and get them these extra special tools, sharpen their existing tools really, to get them to figure out how they're going to navigate, because we all still must navigate. We all mm-hmm. still must. And I say this to my clients a lot too, that we're existing at the vanguard. this is the first time in history, like I think in the 1970s is when the women first could get like bank accounts. Like I can't even imagine, like I wouldn't have had a bank account.
Right.
What was I supposed to do?
Well, you have to ask your husband, of course.
Well, where do you get husbands? Nobody gets married anymore. But
it's ridiculous. Yeah. I mean, it's
very ridiculous.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So society as a whole really only right now sort of lets me have things that I want. Like if you're fortunate enough to have been able to go to college, which is not the norm where I come from. So if you jump through all these hoops, you can maybe have more, we are living at the vanguard. And so by being right here, right now, and you deciding right now how you want to live in this generation, your parents had different choices, your grandparents had different choices, and on and on and on. But right now, choosing to face this OCD gives you the opportunity to build the toolkit and gives you the opportunity to live in maybe brand new ways.
Yeah, because if there is something that we have a really effective treatment for, and we can remove something that is getting in the way of your life, wouldn't that be so advantageous to anybody?
Absolutely.
Whatsoever.
Absolutely. It's like if you add, adding that whole race that you just talked about, where everybody's at the starting line.
Yeah.
I don't even think, did they even mention mental health?
I don't know that they did, but who, if you had a mental health issue, had access to a therapist, right?
Oh my gosh.
And could pay for it and all of those kinds of things too. That would have put a few people ahead, and they would have just crossed the finish line probably at that point before the race even started.
So it's incredibly crucial. And even though it's scary to come into a therapist's office, even though it's scary to try to trust, using your voice to advocate and to make sure the person, I asked this at the very beginning, do you believe in systemic racism? If I hear anything other than, if I hear anything other than a lecture on how it affects clients, then that's not the person for me.
Yeah.
Speaking up if you feel uncomfortable that someone doesn't have your same religious background, or wanting to know that person has access to someone who can help them. Like the more you speak up at the beginning in terms of what you need from your therapist, you're in a better position to benefit, the idea is like, I remember learning this in school. Oh, some people's cultures are against therapy. No, most people have like a shaman or a healing person, or you have an astrologer. That's all forms of therapy.
Yeah.
What they're against is the thing where we come in and tell them how bad and wrong they are and give them some negative experience. So it's not necessarily that the culture is against therapy. I think it's that the culture has created a protective barrier against us, And the unfortunate side effect of that is that these people suffer more. So I think the more we take that equity idea in mind, we as the professionals can work really hard and know we just have to work harder to get our clients of color in the door, to get our people with different identities in the door, and that's how we can do our part to help right a lot of these wrongs.
What, as a therapist, one who specializes in OCD, do you feel you bring into the lives of people that you're working with? What do you provide that's different than, say, a talk therapist, or even maybe the family who, with the best of intentions, wants to be helpful, but might be providing a ton of reassurance or something like that? What do you think that you really bring into the mix that they haven't had?
My perspective is that I'll look at myself as a therapist before I learned about ERP.
Sure.
I think I had some really great tools.
Of course.
One of the main things, though, that I did not have before that I have now is the capacity, as I mentioned earlier, to sit in people's deepest, darkest places. That's where I dwell. I sort of know the shortcuts to get people there sooner.
Yeah.
And the sooner I can get you into this place of familiarity with and ultimately acceptance of that deepest, darkest place, I think I have seen and I've experienced that sort of is a fast track to healing in a lot of different areas, even if it's not necessarily OCD, like being able to sit with those things. Anxiety and depression, like there's so many ways in which this greater notion of willingness and, think about acceptance and commitment therapy, like the ability to live with difficult feelings. Like I think it makes everything better. And so I think that I bring in that thing that I call a superpower. We're near the 405 freeway. If you get in the lane 1 second before somebody else, they're like honking, they're like looking at you all crazy. And it's like, we're not going to get out of the car and fight in the freeway. Like this is dangerous. So you have to work really hard to ignore those people. But many, many people in this world cannot sort of hold their own water. They can't tolerate their own big feelings. And so my favorite thing that I think I bring into the room as an ERP specialist that, other people maybe aren't as comfortable with and don't do as thoroughly is getting people comfortable with their own biggest, nastiest, I'm going to fight you on the freeway feelings.
Yes. If we can become comfortable with being uncomfortable, we've done a great job in the work we do, right?
Yeah. It opens up the world so much.
What is your message then? There's people hopefully watching this who are thinking, maybe I'll do this therapy thing. Maybe I'll give it a try. Or they look at you and think, wait, I can be a therapist. Oh, I knew that was going to go somewhere. That's why I said it. All right. I'm just going to sit back. You take that. Go.
Human beings are just now figuring out feelings. Let me say that differently. In our society, we're just now figuring out the space and the need to like acknowledge and work with feelings, So if you're curious about the therapy in terms of coming in, I would say give yourself the opportunity to get to know what your own experience is going to be. Use your voice, advocate for yourself, speak up, but give yourself a chance to get to know that deepest, scariest emotional part of yourself, because you're going to be better for it. And if you're curious about becoming a therapist, if this inspires you to be a therapist, we need you. Where's which camera? We need you.
Right there. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
This profession thrives on different experiences.
Yeah.
If you have that curiosity, if you have an ACE score of 1 or 10, it's your human experience that makes this into the effective, potentially life-changing,
yes.
Profession that it is. We are in an election year, and for most people, especially people of color and people who are LGBTQ and recent immigrants, this is an incredibly scary, stressful, overwhelming time. And this is a time where we look at sort of what are our political options, what are our social options, what are our financial options. And sometimes these are the years that we end up getting our hopes and dreams dashed, depending on what yours are. What I like to say, and what gives me a sense of power and self-efficacy, and maybe it's selfish, but I get to be selfish, is that the revolution at this time will be internal. Being able to spend time on your own heart and mind, and being able to get to know yourself, like I said, doing it for generations past, to be able to flush out your emotions and learn how to change who you are for the better and live more and more, the life that you want to live. That is power. And to put yourself in a position as a therapist to be able to help other people do that, I think that little by little by little will change not just individuals or families or communities, that we can change society. So I'm a big believer that this profession at its best is revolutionary.
Yeah. Well, and I love what you said, because I say a very similar phrase. My goal is to get you to live the life you want to live and not the life that your OCD wants you to live. Mm-hmm. Right? And I agree, when we have a representative group of people, and you can look, and even for us at NOCD, you can look online and see all the different therapists that we have and all the different colors and creeds and identities and orientations in their that they describe and in the pictures and everything. Mm-hmm. I think that it is a more open and inviting experience for people. I very specifically remember we were talking to a college counseling center one time, and that was one of the big questions that came up was, do you have therapists of color? And I opened up our About Us for their state. I said, here's all the pictures of everybody. And they were floored that we were representative. Right. And I was so proud of that moment that we had that. And it's very important to me as the chief clinical officer that we do that. And again, I've appreciated the years we've known each other and the discussions we've had. And back in the day, the really formulating discussions we had in early case consultations on all of this too, when we were thinking about all of these things and what we wanted to be. And I'm just proud of it. And I thank you for part of that.
That is so exciting to hear. I have a confession. I still do that when I go to the monthly meetings. I scroll through all the pictures and I go, are we still diverse? Who we got? Okay, we have more Black people. Okay, what's his last name? Okay, I hear that accent. Okay, nice. If it ever stopped being like that, I would leave.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's kind of this thing that helps me check in that I'm still with a place that has these values. And what I've seen, I think we've gotten more diverse over the years.
Holy moly, yeah. I'm
like, it just makes me so happy. And it's so exciting. And that's not the norm when you're working in a lot of places as a therapist, you know. Another thing I want to share is early on, for you being a therapist, I was trying to be like, so this is like a meta thing. Like you're talking about the way that OCD comes in the system, and OCD and the system come together to like oppress you and like flatten who you are.
Of course.
The therapist I was in the room so much of the time when I was working with an organization was just like this I was trying to be Carl Rogers. I think I was supposed to be, I never met this man, but this idea of the way that I could present and what was and wasn't professional. You know, and it made sessions really anxiety provoking for me. And I'm sure that there is a levels of effectiveness that I could have reached, you know, had I known that I could be myself as a therapist. And getting trainings from you and listening to the jokes that you told, the statements that you made. And this speaks to the power of all of us being together in a coalition, because I was like, if Patrick McGrath, if this white man can come in here and act like this I mean, it's professional, but still, it's funny. And this is the leader of our clinical team. And this is the energy that we're allowed to have. What it says to me is I get to be myself. And I kid you not, like since those initial trainings, I have been more and more and more and more myself. And I want to say that these conversations are also for our white clients. And also for white people. There's so much of the time where I have a white client, and I'll say this so many ways. I'm like, this is Black girl therapy. You know, acknowledging the role the system plays in how you feel about yourself, acknowledging the pressures of this system and how you're supposed to exist, yada, yada, yada. Like, that's not just for me. That's for everybody.
Everyone has a system.
Everybody. So, it's just, it makes me feel good that there is allyship out in the world, you know? So I just wanted to say that. And you didn't know that when you were making your South Park jokes, but I was like, you can talk about South Park at work? I was like, oh my God, everything's different. One of my favorite compliments similar to that I also got was someone saw me at a conference and do a talk, and I made some jokes in the talk. And he came up to me years later and said, I didn't know that I could do that. I thought I had to be serious all the time. And seeing you do that made me, or allowed me to do that as well too. So I'm thrilled about that too, because here's the thing. Whoever you are, I want you to be you in the therapy. I'm not hiring people to be me. Really?
No. I hope you become a great specialist in OCD. If you take that little part of me, that's great. But no, I want you to be you.
Yeah.
And I want you to be you because your authentic self in that therapy session will be perceived by the person you're working with.
But see the power of like your stance on the inside. You didn't say, hey, Saraa, go, but you didn't even know I had this struggle. This is like to myself.
No.
But the stance that you bring into the room, like people can feel it, which is why, like you were talking about treating people of color. Like if you come in with the assumption that they have, you know, strengths and capacities, you come in with the assumption that like that, not that, that their culture this and they might have that, like was what's in some of the books, sort of pathologizing. If you assume that they have all of these skills and capacities, that's going to come through.
Right.
And the question earlier of like, how do you get people to open up? It's like, I just already assume they're amazing and that they have a right to have an amazing life. And I think that comes through,
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And you're amazing too.
Thank you, Dr. McGrath.
Thank you for being here. It was such a fun conversation.
I had fun too.
Awesome.
It's this feeling of talking back,
Mm-hmm.
It's really, it changes me. I think it enriches the listeners, but it enriches me too, like just to be selfish with it. Like it's very valuable to me. Thank you for hosting me.
Cool. Well, thank you everyone once again for joining us for another episode of the Get to Know OCD podcast. And thank you, Saraa, for being here today. It was absolutely wonderful. If you're interested in treatment for OCD, check us out at NOCD.com, where we work with OCD and related conditions. And if you like the Get to Know OCD podcast, subscribe on the NOCD YouTube channel. We'll see you again soon. Goodbye.